Oh, good, you're here. Come on.
This is the centre of performance. Whenever there's a top performance in New Zealand, it all comes from here. That's Lisa Carrington. She's been doing that for days. That's the boy who got the hole-in-one in Taupo. Oh, he did it again. Hey, Finn, how's the performance going?
Top tier.
Nice. This is our Generate room. In here, you'll find our top performers helping Kiwis maximise their KiwiSaver investments. Get in here, Finn. Maximise.
Right,
Generate. Putting performance first.
Martin Snedden, welcome to my podcast.
Oh, thank you, Dom.
I appreciate you being here.
I love being here.
Yeah, really?
Yeah.
Well, I can't, okay. I'm going to drop any sort of facade of bullshit here. You and I, we've had some meetings over the years, like just briefly sort of in passing.
Remember I was, somehow I ended up as what you'd call CEO of Duco events with Dave Higgins and Dean Lonergan. Why they ever called it CEO, I don't know, because I'm sitting in the same office as the two of them. There's no chance I'm in charge. And so we were running all these events, and you were popping up in the middle of it. So I remember sitting on a plane with you one day. We were flying one place to another, and you told me a bit of your life story. It was good. Yeah, so we've got a bit of history.
Yeah. But I've never told you this until now, but when I was, I suppose, 7 or 8 years old, that's when you made the New Zealand cricket team. And that was like a life-defining period for me. That was probably when I was like peak into my cricket. So you were one of my heroes. You weren't my all-time hero. That was Lance Cairns. I had the Excalibur bat.
Yeah.
But I was a big Martin Snedden fan as a kid.
Yeah, no, a lot of ladies have told me that since. I also knew it at the time, but wasn't the case. That was a great period, the 80s. I mean, we might talk about that. But,
yeah, 100%.
Great history, great memories.
And you mentioned Duco events, which is, in terms of your career, a very small part of it. But I spoke to Dean Lonergan on Friday, and this is what he said. Martin is very considered and never made any rash decisions. He always thinks things through carefully and is just a really good bloke. When he came to Duco, we didn't need a third entrepreneur. We needed someone with a great management mind, and that was Martin Snedden.
Yeah, I didn't know what I was walking into. But from a distance, I had looked at those two guys and I admired what they'd done. They were risk takers, big risk takers. And Dino's right that they needed someone in the middle that was a little bit less of a total risk taker. And but I had seen them do stuff that mainstream sport wouldn't do, wouldn't take the risk on, wouldn't have the drive. And that really interested me. And then stepping into the middle of it, wow. It was I could only last for 2 years with them, but it was a memorable 2 years full of great stuff and the odd bloody disaster, but you know, most of it great stuff. And so I came away with an admiration for those two, because I often hear them slagged off by others. And I stop people when they're doing that and say, no, you've got this wrong. You don't know these people. They're different than each other. You don't put them together and sort of categorise them as the same. They're completely different than each other. But they're bloody hard working. Well, David is when he's on the game, and Dino is the whole time. And once they decide to do something, they move heaven and earth to try and make it work. And sometimes they achieve stuff that all the big sports with all their money simply couldn't do. And that's why they've got my admiration. And but it was an interesting ride.
Yeah, they end up having quite an acrimonious split, but I've got great admiration for both of them, I think. Were you like a handbrake? Like some of their ideas, you were having to shut them down?
Dino's right. He's been a bit polite with that explanation, but I was a wee bit of a handbrake. Not overly successful, mind you. Dino used to label me Mr. Negative, and it probably was because, you know, as they would come up with ideas, which they did every single day, I would point out some of the obstacles, and they would look at me and think, "Oh, you bloody negative bastard, and why don't you just let us get on with it?" And most of the time I had no choice. I had to. And then so what I'd do is try and work on those obstacles and those negatives just to mitigate them and remove them if I could. But they achieved stuff. You know, they were ahead of their time. They still are. You know, you see, when they split up, and it was acrimonious and sad for me, they sort of had to reinvent themselves. And so David, you know, has gone off, and I don't see either of them, for no reason other than their paths don't cross. And I see what they do, and I think, well, good on you. You're still ahead of the game.
Oh, 100%. So that makes up a very small part of your sports admin career. So there's a playing career which went for like a decade, and then there's been this incredible sports admin career. If you had to pick one, what are you more proud of?
Rugby World Cup. Funny.
Okay, so the admin side.
Considering I've been in cricket most of my life, outside of family stuff, it's the Rugby World Cup. I think because it was so huge for New Zealand, that had risk all over the top of it. I knew that if we stuffed up, the organisation I was leading that was delivering it stuffed up, my career was probably not going to recover or take a long time to recover. So you felt that pressure the whole time, and the people that were involved with us, the government, New Zealand Rugby, never let that pressure subside in the whole 4 years that we had to prepare for the thing. But the cooperation we got from right across the country, not just within sport, but right across the country, was spectacular. We set it up. You know, we did it well to get that support. But when people committed to it, they came in guns and all, and it was just fantastic to see the whole country activate. And you know, and then it came off, and we knew it was going to come off unless there was going to be some unforeseen disaster. But it just was a brilliant event. And then, Dom, it was a great lesson in life because, you know, we had the fanfare. It culminated at Eden Park around the corner with an unbelievable final, and not in the way that we expected it to be. But it sort of got there, you know, they got there, and the event was topped off by that. And then 3 days later, everyone's moved on. Everyone else has moved on, and those of us that had spent our lives doing this were sort of sitting there in our offices looking around thinking, no one cares about us anymore.
Well, you even wrote a book about it.
Yeah, I did.
Actually, I've got a whole card about the 2011 Rugby World Cup, so we'll get into that. Just a couple of quick-fire ones. What's the most money you've ever heard of in one negotiation in your various roles?
It's in cricket, and it's to do with India. You know, in the world of cricket, Indian broadcast money is mind-boggling. And about 3 years ago, what happens is all the countries give their broadcasting rights into a pool in the middle, and the International Cricket Council, the ICC, then sells those rights. And, you know, about 6-7 years ago, they sold the rights to Cricket World Cups, those sorts of events, for, I think it was about $2 billion US. But then 3 years later, they sold the same rights for a 4-year period instead of an 8-year period for $3.6 billion. And, you know, you're sitting in New Zealand looking at this, firstly thinking, yahoo, we get a share of that. But secondly thinking, wow, that's just extraordinary. So, yeah.
That's absurd money.
It is.
I was, because I was wondering when I wrote that question down, I was thinking, what would it be? Would it be some sort of cricket negotiation? Would it be one of the early Parker fights? You know, I was thinking maybe $1 million, couple of million. I wasn't expecting billions.
No, and so those in Indian cricket, that's the money you're dealing with, which on the one hand is great for those like New Zealand cricket that are sharing in it. On the other hand, it creates an enormous challenge to the future of cricket.
Speaking of cricket, toughest bowler you ever faced?
Wasim Akram and Waka Yunus, the two Pakistani guys who were just... Listen, I wasn't much of a batsman. Every so often I had a day, but really I was there as a bowler. So the expectations of everyone else were fairly low when I was batting. So there wasn't a huge amount of pressure, but apart from what I put on myself. But facing those two guys, I just didn't have a clue. You know, it's sort of, everyone else you sort of try and work out, and you know, maybe do okay, maybe not. But usually you feel like you got a chance. Not against these guys. Didn't have a chance in hell.
What about the toughest batter you ever bowled to?
one summer in Australia, David Gow got going, and he just slaughtered everyone, including me. I think he picked on me. And so, that was a bit daunting. But it only lasted for a summer. I played against him plenty of times over the 10 years. And that was his summer. And every other time, it was a little bit more even. I mean, he was far better than I was, but at least I had a chance. Whereas that summer I was out of my depth.
We've only been going about 10 minutes. I think this sets the platform for what's going to be a great chat. It's like a tapper's version of what we're getting into, like just an incredible life in top-level sport and top-level business as well. First of all, let's go all the way back. Earliest memories.
Youngest of 5, brought up around the corner in Mount Eden. Sport mad family, luckily 3 older brothers and a sister, and so playing in the backyard as the youngest of that lot, that's what I remember. And then just sort of gradually that emerging into actually formal playing of cricket and rugby and tried my hand at some other sports, but in those days it was really only cricket and rugby that was available. The school system and whatnot, they actually actively dissuaded people from playing football or rugby league or other stuff like that. And so that's what it was. And I was just lucky. I mean, I think the beneficiary of being the youngest in a group of sports mad siblings paid off.
There were times where I'd pretend to be Martin Snedden or Lance Cairns or Richard Hadlee. Yeah. Who did you pretend to be?
Well, I had a pretty active imagination and quite often, as well as what I talked about before, I'd be out in the backyard playing sport by myself with pretending I was in test matches or this or that. And funnily enough, Australian cricketers were the ones, because I'd shortwave radio, can you remember listening to it in those days, listening to cricket from Australia? It was always on shortwave and, the sound of, well, probably people don't remember the sound of that.
What's shortwave, like AM radio? No.
Oh, yeah, well, this was actually shortwave. And I just fell in love with the picture in my mind of Ian Chappell, Doug Walters, Lily came along, those sort of people. And so that, for me, that was the inspiration around cricket. I couldn't believe that years later I was actually playing against those guys out on the Sydney cricket ground or Melbourne cricket ground. I mean, geez. But anyway, that's what sort of fired it up. And then in the winter, it was All Blacks, All Blacks, All Blacks, And I learned to be a great reader. And my grandparents had all these sports magazines, and so I'd just devour those. And Dad had a whole lot of cricket books that I would just devour. It's actually how I learnt English, mathematics, geography, was those sorts of stuff, because I really didn't spend a lot of time in class concentrating on them. And so, I just had this sport feeling infused into me for my whole childhood. And I remember one day driving along, Mum was driving me to a new school on the North Shore, and I don't know why, but I said to her, I'm going to play cricket for New Zealand. And she looked at me and just sort of nodded her head and then moved on. Although our family has an amazing history. My granddad captained New Zealand at cricket, my uncle played for New Zealand, my dad played for Auckland, and my great-grandfather was one of 5 blokes that purchased swampland in Kingsland and turned it into Eden Park. So, all of this has been in my background, and so there was no surprise really that I end up right in the middle of sport for my whole life.
Yeah, I read that. I was going to ask you about that later. That must have been, is that something that was in your mind, like the completion of the Rugby World Cup, which you were heavily involved with, and we'll get to that, at Eden Park?
Yeah.
All Blacks beat France by 1 point. 1 point, was it?
Yeah. 8-7.
Was that something that played on your mind, that came to mind?
Yeah,
I was really, granddad, that was...
Yeah, I was incredibly proud of that. It is why when this debate rages about Eden Park, that I am 100% plus pro Eden Park. And it's just because so much of my history, my family history, has been tied up in that ground. And of course, it's created so much of the great memories of sport in New Zealand that I just can't get away from that. And now I'm living across the road down in Sandringham from it, so I can't get away from it, But yeah, it did. And particularly in the Rugby World Cup, where the capacity of the ground had been raised to 60,000 and we had 11 games there and 8 of them were sold out at 60,000, which was just an extraordinary series of events that, I felt really proud about it.
So you're from a big cricket family, also a big law family as well.
Yeah. Lawyers for Africa.
It was so it was always going to be in your path to go to Dunedin and study law.
Well, I had to go to Dunedin in the end. I'll tell that story. But my grandfather was a lawyer, and he started up a legal firm in Auckland, and that legal firm's still going 105 years later. My grandfather, my father, my older brother Dave, me for 20 years with Dave, and then I moved out into cricket. Dave's still going, so it's still going. But my grandfather had 2 brothers who were lawyers, and the other 2 of them went off and created law firms themselves. So 3 brothers had 3 law firms. Why? I just never thought to ask my dad when he was alive how the hell that could happen. But and then, I suppose I was going through school sort of concentrating mainly on rugby and cricket, which weren't curriculum activities at that stage, and I had no idea what I was going to do. But I had loved reading books in Dad's library about courtroom scenes. And so, that captured my imagination. And then, because everyone else in the family was lawyers, I thought, I'll try and be a lawyer. Well, I started off at Auckland University and I was a disaster. And the reason I was a disaster is really rugby, cricket, drinking, and I had a great girlfriend. And so there was no chance there. And so after 2 years, I found I couldn't make headway. But I could if I went down to Otago, to Dunedin University. I could get into law school there, whereas I couldn't up here. So I made the step. I didn't know anyone down there, one mate, and I went down there, and that was a brilliant moment in our lives, really, because I ended up meeting my wife there. She was doing a law degree as well, and
Annie.
Annie. We've had 4 kids, and we've sort of strong-armed each of them to go through Otago if they wanted any financial assistance at all. And so
you're encouraging your kids to go to Dunedin.
Yeah, because we had such a great time that it was sort of like, you've got to go, guys. This is just, you've got to.
What, just like the rite of passage?
Yeah,
aspect?
Well, it is. And of course, our best friends in our lives have all emerged out of that period. And so all of them have been around our kids as well and had their own kids. And so, there was all this myth about Dunedin. A lot of it true and a lot of it myth that just kept being fed to our kids. So there was no choice when it came to it. They had to go.
What were you like in the 70s? What was Dunedin like in the 70s? You were like on towards the end of your degree. You were on the cusp of like playing for the country.
I was.
So you can't have been much of a party boy, eh?
So you're missing the point here. We were even at international level. Cricket was pretty social. No one was. There were no contracts. You weren't working full time playing cricket. The seasons were pretty short compared to what they are now. So I'd sort of started emerging when I left school, and then went down to Dunedin, and I think it was in my second year there. I had a good run with the cricket, and in March that year they picked a New Zealand team to tour Australia, but it wasn't leaving until October. So I had 6 months' notice, and in the law school this was quite a big thing. He's a guy playing for New Zealand, even though I hadn't yet. So we celebrated that winter, the selection, and
the
whole winter, of course. And fitness levels weren't what they are today. So, but I was young, and so preparation for the tour wasn't ideal, but it was a dream come true. And of course, October, the start of the tour, coincided with exams. And so because I'd had notice, I'd gone to the lecturers and said, hey, I've got a problem here. I'm meant to be in Australia. Well, Otago Law School was pretty sporting minded. And so what they did is they created separate exams for me. And I sat them in the 2 or 3 days. You know, I had to do 5 exams in about 3 days. And then at least it meant I could bugger off to Australia and not have to think about it again. My wife-to-be was doing the same exams, and I thought they would create different exams for me than they might for the others, so she got a bit of a head start with understanding what might be in those. But anyway, and then I go to Australia, and this is a dream come true. 21 years old, playing on all these brilliant venues that I'd dreamed about, and playing against the guys that I'd grown up inspired by, playing with Richard Hadlee and Jeff Howarth, and a team that history showed was a really good bunch of players. And, that was just a fantastic way to start playing for New Zealand. And then, of course, I had to come back and go to university the next year, and I was the richest student in Dunedin because we'd got given $10,000, no tax, to tour, which you didn't have to spend any of it because you got daily allowances that covered everything. So I turned back up in Dunedin with $10,000 in the account. I'm the only student in Dunedin with any money in the bank account. And so that started off another winter of celebration of what had happened.
Yeah. 10,000 in 1981, 80?
So Dad said to me, right, you've got to put it in a scheme that at that stage the government, I forget the name of the scheme, I should remember this because it was a bloody beaut, which was that they would guarantee you an interest rate which was equivalent to the rate of inflation plus 2 or 3%. And inflation was going crazy. So I was getting about 16, 17, 18% per year on that 10,000. It ultimately became the deposit for my first home. So having had the joy of 3 months in Australia doing what I just love, to end up with some money in the bank, I would have gone for nothing. I didn't. You didn't play for money. What was
that like with the day you first turned up to New Zealand camp or whatever?
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the term imposter syndrome?
Yeah, I know it well. Probably too young to think about it that way. When you're young, you don't think you're not good enough, sort of. That happens when you get a bit older, and that did happen to me a little bit later on when things didn't go quite so well. But
it's just that cocky, brash, youthful arrogance.
Well, I was smart enough to keep my mouth largely shut, because most of these guys I didn't really know. I hadn't played against or with guys enough by that stage to have. But there was 2 other young guys in the team, John Bracewell and Ian Smith. So the 3 of us, who were all just picked out of junior sort of development pathway type things, we became good friends. So, and you just gradually worked your way into the friendships and whatnot that then lasted for a long time.
What was Hadlee like?
Oh, well, he's a little bit misunderstood, Richard. At that point in time, this is 1980, the success of the New Zealand team depended entirely on Richard Hadlee. Other guys could chip in, but if we were going to win, it would be because Richard made us win.
He was our Michael Jordan.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And he felt the pressure of that. And so, and there was an enormous strain on him to turn up every single day, put in an enormous effort, and succeed. And so he sort of was a little bit insular in that period of time. And he also, at that stage, 1980, he was clearly emerging as one of the really good players of Test cricket. But he hadn't at that stage reached the pinnacle of what he became. As the 1980s went on and he started to just knock off all these achievements gradually, he just relaxed. And and, opened up a lot more. Well, I've known Richard ever since that time, and I've worked for him. I was his boss for a while when I was at New Zealand Cricket. I came to really, really like him and totally trust him because he was so organised, so diligent, and had great integrity. And so you could totally rely on him to do what he was doing. But, carrying that New Zealand team in the early 80s, that must have been an enormous strain on him. And of course, I didn't have a clue. I was just a student, and playing, as much for fun as for serious stuff. And so he had to carry a lot. But man, he was good.
And you came along at the beginning of the Beige Brigade?
Yeah.
What year did because that made a huge comeback with the ACC and different things.
So my first tour, this one in Aussie, was that Kerry Packer had sort of had a bit of an explosion in Australia in the late 70s. So 1980, we come along, we tour Australia. Suddenly we're playing in these uniforms that we had no say whatsoever in the design or colour of. And so, we were, to start with, called the Chocolate Soldiers, and then the Beige Brigade sort of emerged a little bit later. But also, we were playing under lights for the first time. We were playing with a white ball with fielding restrictions. It was all new. And the first part of the tour, we'd played a test series and we'd got wiped badly. So that was a bit of a disaster. But as the one-day series went on, we started to play really well and capture the imagination of people at home because cricket was starting to be broadcast back in at home, and the one-day games would come in at a viewer-friendly time because they were day-night games. And so people got really interested, and of course then, it moved towards the underarm game towards the end of the tour, which it just took off. It exploded from there, and that explosion carried on for a few years after.
Yeah, okay, let's talk about that. February 1, 1981, a day that goes down in New Zealand sporting history. When you think of that day, what comes to mind?
The very first thing I think of, because I'm thinking selfishly, is that I took one of the greatest catches of all time in the outfield. It actually was a really good catch. I was fielding right out on the boundary, on the mid-wicket, sideways to the wicket. Greg Chappell was batting. Aussie had batted first. And he smacked this ball out towards me, and I went running in at it. Now, I'd played a lot of rugby at fullback, and I was actually really good at catching the ball. And so I just kept going at it and ended up diving at it and catching the ball, which... So if you see replays of it or whatever, YouTube, it actually looks really good. It was fantastic.
I watched on YouTube. Did you? I suppose the camera technology at the time, you just come from the right-hand side of the frame from out of nowhere.
I know. They should have been following me the whole way. I don't know where they were.
Not even the umpires were watching you, right?
Well, that was the amazing. So I dive forward, take this catch, and nothing's happening. Mark Burgess had been feeling close to me. He jumped up, and Joy jumped over the top of me, I think. And then we sort of started to notice that nothing was happening in the middle. So wandered into the middle, and I said to Greg Chappell, I caught it. And he didn't say a thing. He just sort of turned around and walked away. Now, to be fair to him, it's not the batsman's job. I mean, you could say, all right, he should take the word of a fieldsman, but, it's still not his job. But the two umpires, because Jeff Houth, the captain, was going at them full pelt at this stage, they said, well, we weren't watching. We were watching the batsman running between the wickets. Pathetic. Anyway, so Greg was given not out. He was on 58. He went on and got 90. Funny thing is, when he got out, I was bowling to him. Same thing happened, almost a replica, and Bruce Edgar came flying in and took a beautiful catch at mid-wicket, and Greg walked off straight away, didn't hang around. But then the game, of course, then went later on, and I should say, this is at the MCG, which is the huge bowl of a sports ground, and it had a world record crowd for one-day internationals there that day. I think it was 70-something thousand. And it was hot as hell, and sort of it came down to the last over, and it was really close. And then, the Aussie umpires pulled a couple of LBWs out of their bag just to keep it even. And then, the last ball, Brian McKechnie went into face, and there was this commotion happening in the middle, and we were sort of looking from the sideways thinking, what are they talking about? And then the penny dropped that Greg had told his brother Trevor to bowl underarm.
Yeah, so Brian, by the way, double All Black, so played cricket for New Zealand with you, played for the All Blacks as well.
Yeah.
He was facing the last ball of the match, and New Zealand needed 6 to draw.
To draw, not to win, to draw or tie. And this is the largest playing arena in the world of cricket. And when I say playing arena, I mean the grass. The boundaries are bigger than anywhere else. Brian is coming in to face his first ball. Brian is a good guy, but there was no chance in hell that he was going to hit a 6. And so he comes in, and then it becomes obvious that Greg has told Trevor to bowl underarm. And Trevor's looking at his brother saying, I don't want to do this. And Greg is saying, well, I'm sorry, you have to do it. And Rod Marsh, as wicketkeeper, sort of wagging his head saying, no, don't do it. And anyway, it happened. And of course, there was just, everyone was stunned. It was in the rules that you could do this, but no one ever, it's one of those rules you never know about, and you never would think of doing it. And then it happened. And, I often refer to it as the greatest day in New Zealand cricket, because it is the day that New Zealanders in huge numbers stood up and started taking real notice of cricket. And from that moment on, the popularity of cricket, it actually, this is February 1981, and remember the Springboks toured that acrimonious tour a bit later in the year. Cricket surpassed rugby that year in terms of popularity and also reputation. And so it's sort of, we were looking at each other thinking, what the hell happened? Anyway, I think, to be honest, we realised we were onto a winner pretty early, that this gave us the moral high ground that 44 years later we've still got with Australia. And I still have Australian mates who refer to it, or if we're just getting to know each other, I just slip in, I played in the underarm game, and suddenly they're really embarrassed and apologising, and I give speeches about it, about this. So it was actually a great thing. The poor old Aussie team, they didn't know what hit them. We went in. Normally, what happens is after a game, in those days anyway, the side that's batting second will go in the dressing room of the side that has been fielding, and you have a few beers. Well, we decided some reason we would go in there, which is pretty courageous of us. But we went in there and it was a morgue, and they just didn't know what had hit them. So we pretty quickly backed out of that. But we got on really well with those guys. Greg I've always found, even when I run into him now, he's actually a really good guy. And so, it wasn't one of those things that caused any acrimony between the team. But man, did we play it up when we got the chance, and every chance we could.
But is part of you still a bit bitter with Greg because you caught him out, and you could have won a Toyota for catch of the match?
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. You're right.
He cost you a bloody car.
A brand new Toyota was on offer for the best catch of the summer.
I mean, the commentary at the time, Richie Beno says, "What a catch! That's one of the best catches I've ever seen in my life."
Well, you got to respect Richie. But of course, I would have only got a hubcap or something like that once we'd shared it around the team.
Is that what happened?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you won it as an individual, then it went into like a team.
Yeah, well,
or something.
that sort of was the done deal, and of course, usually Richard was winning the cars time after time, and so he was having to shove them all, which he got a bit sick of at times. But listen, it didn't for a second cause any acrimony. As I say, it just gave us the moral high ground forever with Australia. And isn't it funny that the guy that faced it, Brian McKechnie, only a few months beforehand had been playing for the All Blacks at Cardiff Arms Park, and Andy Hayden had dived out of the line out in a predetermined ploy, and we'd got a penalty, and Brian had kicked the winning goal. So to be involved in two of the most controversial episodes in New Zealand sport history.
Like the Forrest Gump of New Zealand sport, just involved in all these pivotal moments.
That's right.
It's great. Were you guys sort of aware? So you go back into the change room after the game. Are you sort of bewildered, or are you laughing about it? You realise what a big deal it is at the time?
We're not laughing that quickly. We're a bit bewildered. But remembering, huge ground, and the chances of Brian hitting a six were non-existent, and even if he had, it would have been a draw or a tie. So, it wasn't. We were just flummoxed by why they would do it. Greg had a really difficult summer. He'd been struggling to score runs. The demands on him as captain of Australia were ridiculous. The Australian Cricket Board had us and them flying all over Australia. No cohesion in the way that the calendar of games was worked out. So he was utterly and completely burnt out by the time, and that affected his decision-making on the day. The following year, they toured New Zealand. We had this brilliant occasion at Eden Park, which was the biggest crowd in cricket history. And Greg came out to bat, and the crowd booed him out into the middle. A wag jumped off the terraces, because there's no security as to what you bought in the games in those days, and he had a bowling ball, and he got out and he bowled the ball along the ground. It was brilliant, and Jeremy Coney picked it. Jeremy was a laugh. Anyway, Greg went on and scored 100, and he got a standing ovation coming off the field. He'd just published a book about the previous summer, and there was a chapter on my catch, and there was a chapter on the underarm. I'd bought the book and I took it into the Aussie dressing room afterwards, and I got him to sign it for me. So, good memories.
Geez, you mentioned Eden Park again. Yeah, there's this amazing, given the backstory with your great-granddad, it's been like this amazing backdrop to your life.
Oh, totally. So my granddad and then my Uncle Colin, he had this amazing thing where he was a rugby and cricket commentator. And in those days, they used to play club rugby every Saturday at Eden Park, then representative rugby, then the All Blacks. And in cricket, when Auckland was playing there. Well, Colin was the commentator for both sports every Saturday for 40 years. He only gave up in the end because he felt uncomfortable that I was out there playing for New Zealand, so he retired. So that connection with the ground is just enormous. Yeah.
What's your proudest moment as a New Zealand cricketer?
Two really. One was I'd had, despite the fact I'd had a good first tour, I struggled a wee bit on and off with my career, and I was out of the team a bit, and then I got brought back in when we were playing the West Indies, and the West Indies, were at the height of their fame. And we're playing a test in Christchurch, and I was a bit worried because I was on a comeback and, playing against one of the best teams in history. And I started okay, and so I relaxed a bit more into it. But then on the last day, we had to bowl the West Indies out to have a chance of winning, and Hadlee had started bowling at the start of the day, and Viv Richards was batting, and he just smashed them everywhere. And then Coney, who was captain, said to me, "Well, your turn." Ooh. Anyway, I started all right, and I had him in a little bit of difficulty, and then I bowled a ball and he slashed at it, and he nicked it through to Ian Smith at wicketkeeper. And it was one of the turning points of my life, was to actually, because I'd been up against it, I'd been struggling, to get him out at a time that mattered. And then I went on and I got 5 wickets that day, and we won the test match. And but then probably 2 years later, a test match in Perth, which is remembered as the Mark Greatbatch test, because he basically, against Australia, he saved the match for New Zealand by just batting and batting and batting for almost 2 days. And it was quite a young team because there were a few injuries, and so I had to lead the bowling attack. And Aussie got 500, but I actually bowled quite well. And then in the second innings, I came out to bat with Mark just straight after lunch. So we were about 7 down, I think. So the game was going to be over in half an hour or an hour. well, I managed to bat the rest of the day with him, and we saved the test match. And, it was just one of those things where I thought, wow, that's just a memory of that just won't ever go away. Just the satisfaction of working with them to stop them in their tracks and enable us to hold on and draw the game was just, it wasn't even a win, it was a draw. But it felt like a win at the end of it because we'd pulled a draw out of the hat, really. And so, those sort of things, in my mind.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Do you ever catch up with Mark Greatbatch?
Yeah. We sort of, because I've been involved in cricket administration, I do run into guys, not all the time, but every so often, So
is that something you bring up, or is it just unspoken, like this unspoken?
It's sort of unspoken, I think it created a bond between us because we were completely different types of individuals, and at times had rubbed up against each other a little bit the wrong way. But when you've done something like that with someone, you sort of do have that bond that you don't need to talk about it. You just know that was a good thing to do together.
I can't imagine you rubbing anyone up the wrong way.
Oh, listen, I did have a bit of a mouth on me at times when in the second half of my career. I sometimes get surprised when I run into some younger guys who I played with who say to me, well, you're a bit of a handful there towards the end, tired and old and grumpy. But I don't believe them, but there's enough of them saying it that it must be true. So yeah, every so often.
And any memorabilia? What have you got at home? You got any balls or wickets?
Well,
or beige?
I did have, but then what happens is you start giving it away. People say, "Oh, we've got an auction here." Yeah, and it's like with the Duco stuff, but most of it had gone by then. It did, and the Beige Brigade uniform, sort of, I'd given it all away before it actually, the guys made it into what it is now. So I don't care. I've got the memories. That's all that matters. Listen, when COVID happened, they had no sport content because there was no live sport around TV. So Sky Sport purchased from Channel 9 in Australia the highlights of the old games. Well, it's the first time I'd seen most of these because when we were playing, and so you weren't, on a couch watching TV. And then each night after a game, they'd have half an hour highlights, usually at about 11 p.m. Well, by 11 p.m. you'd had a skinful. You weren't really, and all you were watching anyway has either been hit for 4 or 6 or get the odd wicket. So it was actually quite nice in COVID to actually have a chance to look at a whole lot of games. I'd fast forward to try and remember, did I bowl all right that day or not? And if I didn't, I wouldn't watch it. I still can't. But if I did, I'd hang in there. Then I'd say to Annie or the kids, come and watch. This is your chance. Well, they weren't in the slightest bit interested. But it was quite nice seeing it.
And how did retirement look? Did you end on your own terms?
Yeah, I did. And that was a good thing to do. Because one of the real issues, and it still exists today, maybe even more because of the professional game, is that if a player effectively disappears out of it because they're dropped, then somehow they carry that, and sometimes they carry it for their lives. And I've seen it cause lots of damage to people where the very team or the organisation they were working with who had given them these opportunities throughout their career, they'd end up hating. And it's awful to watch. Well, we'd sort of got to 1990, so I'd had, 10 years on and off of playing. And I was lucky because in those days you weren't full-time professionals, so I'd got a law degree and I was working with my brother. And so I knew what my next step in life was going to be. And then Annie and I started having kids. And by the time we had a second kid, it had become pretty obvious to me that it wasn't on for me to disappear on 2-month or 3-month tours and leave it to her to look after these things. So in 1990, I just sort of decided, right, that's enough, got to stop. So I made the decision. I don't think I even talked it over with her. I just sort of said, nah, that's it. I've done it. I've enjoyed it. Time to move on with life. And that was really good because it actually meant that I went into what was after that with a pretty excited, positive frame of mind instead of it being, I'm only doing this because I've been kicked out sort of thing.
You always had something to do. It's not like you finished and it's like, what am I going to do now? You know, I might have to train to do real estate. Or
Yeah, and that's a real problem for professional sport.
Yeah.
Is that, athletes give so much, and they're required to give so much to it now, that they don't think about the future, and I don't blame them. And then the future becomes the now, and then a lot of them just aren't ready. Now, rugby and cricket, with the growth of player associations, have actually developed really good player development, whole-of-person development programs for players. So there is much more attention paid to what happens next and players getting help. But of course, it's for most players, they're not going to concentrate on that until it's obvious they're going to finish. And so, it takes a while for them to tune into that, but it does help a hell of a lot. But other sports, like I'm in cycling now, and I already see it, they go out of it and that's it. And they don't know, they're looking around thinking, what do I do now? And people's memories are short. You might be a hero while you're on the track or on the field, but once you're finished, and people move on. And it's quite a reality. You will have struck this yourself in your career a few times where, you come to the end of something and you realise that people just move on and they don't think about you. It's not a nasty thing or anything like that. It's just that's the way it is. And you sometimes, and this is a real risk in sport, is that a player's self-identity is wrapped up in what they are on the field. And in cricket now, we spend a lot of time trying to get players to understand they are people. That's their identity, their people identity, and they happen to play cricket, which is important, but it's not everything. But of course, it's hard for people that are in the middle of it the whole time to accept. But it is true. If you can't see your value as a person as opposed to what the public sees, then you've got a problem you've got to sort out.
Yeah, I mean, it's a far smaller scale than being like representing your country in sport or winning a gold medal. But I did a breakfast radio show on one radio station called The Edge for 20 years, and you do become sort of defined by this public role.
And you might try and play it down, but you were far more in the public eye consistently than I would have been. And every morning, alarm goes off and you have to gear yourself up to perform. And so you go at it. And then it's really hard when you don't have the opportunity to perform because someone else stops it. Or you've had enough, you're burned out. Burnout's a very real thing that people should take a lot more notice of.
What did you miss the most and the least when you finished up with cricket?
I loved playing on the big grounds around the world. I think deliberately thought, right, a tour to England's going to be my last tour, and then to play a test at Lord's. The previous tour I'd been on, I was 12th man, so I didn't get to play in the test there. So to play the test at Lord's and play on the other great grounds over there, that was a good thing. I loved the rhythm of touring in the old days. These days where you play only international matches and it's really, pressure cooker the whole way. Whereas a tour to England in 1990 is that we would play 3 test matches, but we would have a lot of time just touring around England playing against county teams. So it was a pretty low pressure environment and just, having fun doing that and having a beer each night with people and stuff was all good fun. So I sort of missed that. But the imposition on your family life,
the sacrifice.
Yeah, well, I didn't really see it as a sacrifice for myself, but I started to see towards the end the sacrifice that Annie was making, letting me go on these tours. I mean, she'd come over for bits and pieces of some of them and have a good time, but that, when the kids were there, that just was really difficult. So I actually loved sort of being in one place for a decent length of time which I hadn't been for 10 years. So that was good.
Did you become a smoker at all?
Nah.
Heavy cigarette sponsorship at the time, Rothmans,
Heavy.
B&H.
So Rothmans, B&H, yeah.
I remember seeing a game at the Fitzherbert Oval in Palmerston North. Ian Botham was playing. It was some exhibition match against Central Districts, I think. And as soon as he got out, he was in his caravan.
Yeah. No, he smoked a lot of things. I think I did my serious smoking at about 11. But I never smoked.
Yeah.
It never interested me. But of course, when you were sponsored by those guys, they would give you cartons and cartons of cigarettes. So the guys in the team that did smoke, and there were quite a few, would line up and say, "Hey, just give me your carton."
It's amazing. It seems crazy now, doesn't it?
And that's you're right. And the alcohol thing was also, like we went to the pub every single night that we're on tour. That's another reason I like touring. And the bowlers had something in common, so the bowlers would stick together. It's a bit like you go to a party and the males are on one side and the females are on the other side. Well, it was the same on cricket tours. The bowlers would stay together and the batsmen, if they turned up, were over there. And the bowlers had because we were the blue-collar, hard-working lot. The batsmen were just flashy, white-collar.
Show ponies.
And so there was a hell of a social time. And I'd tell my son, who's playing cricket for Wellington, I said, we would have a team meeting the night before a test match or a one-day international. And in those days, you had bugger all support staff with you on tour. And so the players would have jobs they had to do. And someone would be in charge of the alcohol for the team thing. So their job was to get the concierge to bring up enough ice to fill the bath in the room that you were having the team meeting in, and then all the cans of beer would have to be in there 2 or 3 hours beforehand, so they were ice cold when you were sitting down having a serious meeting about how you were going to attack the opposition the next day. And when you compare that, and that happened my whole 10 years, to nowadays where my son, who plays domestic cricket for Wellington, almost doesn't have a single drink of alcohol between October and April. It's just night and day. I'd rather have my time.
It was a glorious time to be representing your country, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And were there transferable skills that you got from playing professional sport that you carried on to the boardroom?
Totally.
Yeah? Like
and that was the thing that really more to being a lawyer, an effective lawyer. So I'd been tinkering around being a lawyer for the 1980s, and then once I retired, I was into it big time with my brother and became a partner with him. And do you know what it was? I think I learned a whole lot when I was playing cricket about handling pressure and the importance of preparation. But what I realised is I'd never done that properly when I was playing. But I'd seen Richard Hadlee do it, I'd seen Martin Crowe do it, I'd seen John Wright do it. And so I knew right from the start of my post-cricket career that's what I had to do to succeed in the law, and that's what I did, and it was incredible. And so you channeled pressure in the right way from there, and then that did carry into the sports administration stuff after that as well.
Yeah, you mentioned Martin Crowe. What made him so good? Did you play with him at the peak of his career, or did he sort of peak after you?
Oh, I think probably at the peak.
Yeah. Wow.
He was a bit complex, Marty. He had a lot of pressure coming on him, a bit like Richard.
Like Tortured Geniuses?
Yeah, there was a book called that Joseph Romanos wrote. It was called Tortured Genius, and he struggled to just relax and enjoy life enough. He struggled to enjoy what he was achieving enough, I think. And so I saw him play unbelievable cricket against, I talked about the West Indies before, one of the best teams with the most fearsome bowling attack, and then switched to playing against Pakistan with Wasim Akram, Wakaro Yunus and some really good spinners. And he had prepared so well, he'd got himself mentally right, and he would be unbelievably outstanding against them. So I saw him at his peak. But, it didn't go smoothly for him. I think what happened is during the 80s, he had a whole lot of experienced guys around him. And then we all a lot of us retired in 1990 and he was left a little bit without that protection, you know, and it sort of got to him a little bit, and things didn't work out quite as well during the 1990s for him. Apart from the 92 World Cup in New Zealand, where he was just sublime. Fantastic.
Yeah, and you had a front row seat with these guys. Hadlee, Crowe. It was an incredible time to be part of the New Zealand cricket scene, eh?
And Lance Cairns, you mentioned before,
yeah,
you
Cairns,
know.
I loved Lance.
And me too, because what he did, even though, you know, I got on the team and I'm a bowler and I'm a competitor, if you like, for a place in the test team with him. And yet he took me under his wing right from the start and looked after me for those first few years, you know, and was a really good, really good person to anchor me with things. He understood how hard it was at that level. You know, there were a lot of us who didn't have necessarily the talent to be stars at international cricket. So we were spending a lot of time trying to hang on in there and do okay. And there was an art to that. And New Zealand was really good at it, is that we had a whole lot of guys who could do okay. And you know, and Lance was one of them. And then, of course, he had a couple of years where he just had the fun of smashing all those sixes, and he was such a great character.
Why did the shoulderless bat not catch on? I
it
had
did
one.
for a while. it did for a while. Excalibur.
Yeah, Excalibur. I had one. Yeah, I don't remember scoring one boundary with it myself, but
in those days too, you forget now where the live broadcast photography means you get right in at anything you want to. It's amazing. In those days, you see it, but from the distance, so it wasn't quite as prominent as it would be now.
Yeah. Hey, we've got some silly quickfire team questions here, and then we can move on to the business side of your career, which has been longer than the cricket.
Yeah, it is.
Who was the funniest guy in the dressing room?
Oh, Coney. Brilliant sense of humour. Such a clever person with words. His training had been drama, and you know, so he brought all these dramatic skills to everything. Plus, he played the guitar. He and Wrighty played the guitar. So we would, on this first tour, this is how different it is now. We would go to all these country towns that Australian cricket had sent us to. And in a function, we'd get up on stage and sing Po Keri Keriana, or, you know, it was sort of, but, you know, Jerry, unbelievably funny.
Yeah. Who was the most serious in the team?
Hadlee and Chatfield both were pretty poker face serious a lot of the time. And, you know, they enjoyed themselves, but yeah, they kept it pretty serious.
But you were one of them, right? Like, the three bowlers.
Yeah, well,
Chatfield, Hadlee, and
Cairns and me and Troop and of course Bracewell and Bok.
Who would you never want to sit next to on a long haul flight?
Probably younger. You know what you realised when you got older, how far out of touch you were with the younger guys in the team. So someone like an Adam Perori, my last tour, he was 19, I was 31. We weren't quite going to be
Besties.
He's
a good. I've had him on the podcast. Yeah, he's a good dude now.
Oh, he has done some remarkable stuff. But he was a different generation, you know, different mentality than me. So, you know.
Yeah, I can't imagine what like a 19-year-old Perori was like. Just the arrogance, the ego.
Yeah, well, we're all a bit like that if we're, you know, at that age.
Who had the weirdest pre-match ritual?
Jeff Houth. Before he went into bat in internationals, he would throw up, vomit, every time. The pressure of it, and then, you know, carry on. But that happened all the time with him. I loved Jeff, and he was a great captain, but he felt the pressure internally, you know, and so it was tough. And so he, you know, before he batted, he'd throw up.
Best and worst dressed off the field? Martin Crowe would have been a snazzy dresser.
Oh, yeah, no, he thought he was. No, he would have been. You know, probably Marty, I guess. The worst dressed. Richard had some awful taste in fashion.
What does that mean? Can you elaborate?
Well, you see old films, and you look at some of the stuff guys are wearing and think, man, did they really wear that?
Who talked the most rubbish during a game? Were you a sledger?
No. Braces by far was the biggest sledger, John Bracewell. Like, he would be in at people big time. Some of our batsmen would cop it from the Aussies, but not, for all their reputation. It was just went over your head, or you didn't give a stuff about it.
And who was grumpiest after a loss?
Depending on how we'd lost, Richard, Jeff would hate it if we lost because we'd played badly, if we'd let ourselves down. Wasn't too worried if we'd actually played pretty well and lost, but if we'd let ourselves down, then the leaders got pretty grumpy.
So after cricket, it was law for a bit. And then you ended up back at NZ Cricket as the...
Yeah, so... Well, actually, it both happened in the 1990s. So I retired in July 1990. Went straight into my law firm full-time. But at the same time, exactly the same time, I went on to the board of New Zealand Cricket. So by September 1990, I was on the board of New Zealand Cricket.
Wow.
They had been after someone who knew a bit more about what it was like at the front line for players, and I just happened to be at the right place, right time. So through the 90s, I worked with my brother for 10 years, 1990 to 2000, and I was on the New Zealand Cricket Board for quite a bit of time during that time. And then Chris Doig had been CEO, and Chris, amazing figure, had decided he'd had enough. And so he said to me, why don't you think about becoming CEO of New Zealand Cricket, which was based in Christchurch. And I thought, I can't do that. And he said, you only have to work 4 days a week and you can play golf on the 5th. So naively, I believed him. And anyway, Annie was happy enough. We had 4 kids at that stage, and she said, let's have a change in life and shift the whole family down to Christchurch, and away we went. So, it just sort of happened, really, mainly because of Chris. And I suddenly found myself as CEO of New Zealand Cricket, straight out of a law degree, never having worked in a sort of a organisation, never had, to look after people or whatever. And so it was a bit different. But, the first few weeks I was there, we had the New Zealand team in Pakistan, and a bomb went off outside their hotel. And I soon learned the realities of life there, and terrorism became quite a big thing for the whole time that I was CEO. It was just, at that time, it was a big part of the cricket world, particularly in Asia. So, I just sort of learnt on the job. I had good people around me to teach me a bit, and it was a volatile time because it was also when the players just started up with the Players Association, and in the first 6 months of what was a negotiation between me and Heath Mills for the first ever player contract system was a bit volatile, to the point where about a month before the start of the cricket season, every player in New Zealand went on strike. So it was a very public event. It kept Radio Sport going every day.
How is that for you? So you're an ex-player, a very experienced ex-player, so you've got sort of, I suppose, an empathy or understanding of the players. But then you're on this other camp.
Yeah, it was a bit
confusing time.
It was confronting, and I think it was for the players, the current players as well, because I had been a player. But I guess by that stage, 10 years after I'd retired, they just regarded me as an old fart, part of the past. And it got incredibly acrimonious. And even when we solved it, I solved it with a sledgehammer, not through gifted negotiation with Heath, but a sledgehammer. And so I forced an end result onto the players that, of course, they hated. But then I did a really smart thing, which was that I went back to Heath and said, we can't, that's not the way I see it. I actually agree with what you were trying to do. Just a couple of aspects of what you wanted, how much money you wanted were just too much for the circumstances. But I really value. And Heath and I became, having been not knowing each other and been in the public domain, pitted against each other in a big way, we had become and still are really good friends over that, how many years since then? It's 24 years. And the Players Association has been one of the great success stories of cricket in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So, those sort of things, they happen. And you're sort of, for a moment in time, you're fighting as hard as you can with something. But as time goes past, life moves on. And
you must have learned so much about yourself. I suppose this is like sharpening the axe for the 2011 World Cup. But
yeah.
What did you learn about the importance about being respected rather than necessarily being liked?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. Is that, you had to, because seriously, the players hated me at that stage. And I don't blame them. I was the opposition in their minds. They didn't actually understand that I actually agreed with them having a really good system. And it's just they wanted too much money that we couldn't afford. That was the only real impediment. But yeah, enormous pressure. But probably, Dom, the pressure of having your players in Pakistan and a bomb's gone off outside of their hotel. It's blown out the windows of the team bus. Fortunately, they weren't sitting on it. Knowing that you had players' lives in your hands, that was even harder to deal with. That's reality. And trying to find a way to help the players recover from that. And then, a couple of years later, we're in South Africa for the Cricket World Cup, and the International Cricket Council want us to play Kenya and Nairobi, and that was an absolute no-go area for Westerners at the time. And I sat down with the players and I said, I just can't let you go there. And then I did the same with the international cricket people. Didn't give a stuff. They thought we were just being objectionable. And I said, no, our players have been through this, the reality of it. This is not theory. This is stuff that we know. And I said, I'm not putting them there. And the players themselves, this is 2 years after all the contract issues. They were trusting me by then. And I said to them, I'm not going to ask you to make a decision. I'm going to make this decision. But I do want to know what you think. And you know what? Half of them wanted to go and half didn't. And so I defaulted a World Cup match, and it cost us a place in the semi-finals doing that. But the players and the Player Association supported it full time. And then, these people that had been criticising me in world cricket, about a year and a half later, terrorists attacked their umpires and match referees in Pakistan, shot at a bus that they were in, and someone was wounded and someone was killed. And cricket never went back to Pakistan for 20 years after. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, if you'd actually listened to me, you might have found that you wouldn't have had that problem then. But you were too ready to put money ahead of welfare of players. So you do learn a hell of a lot. And I'd been through the mill. And I hadn't solved everything spectacularly well, but I'd done okay. And New Zealand cricket was doing okay. It was Stephen Fleming's team, and he was a superb captain, and the players did pretty well. And so I think when they came to look for someone to run the Rugby World Cup, they looked at that and thought, they need someone who is visible to New Zealanders, who New Zealanders sort of can connect with for this. And so, they came to me and said, would you consider it? And I said, no, I'm too wrapped up in the Black Caps. I want them to help them win the Cricket World Cup in 2007. So it went dead, but then they had trouble finding who they wanted, and they came back a little bit later, and by that stage I thought, I asked them whether I could combine the two jobs for a while, which they agreed. So I got the Black Caps through to the 2007 World Cup. They didn't win it. But I was able to then to transition out of it pretty nicely.
Yeah, you just mentioned Stephen Fleming before. How's the aircon?
It's fine.
Is the temperature good?
No, it's fine.
Yeah, I think it's a Toshiba as well.
I can't take my jersey off because I haven't ironed my shirt.
Yeah. So when do you start with the 2011 World Cup stuff? Is that 2007?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what they'd learnt from the mistakes of Australia running the Rugby World Cup in 2003 was that if New Zealand Rugby itself was to run the event, it would take over their whole organisation. So they and the government agreed, let's set up a separate entity. We'll each own 50% of it, and that will be a new organisation set up solely to run the event. And so that's the way it went. And then, of course, they're starting from a zero employee base, so they start looking for a chief executive and a couple of senior managers, and it started from there. So I got appointed at the end of 2006, did that role, which was pretty gentle at that stage, and the New Zealand Cricket CEO role through to the end of the Cricket World Cup in May 2007, and then shifted across and began. So it was just over 4 years of preparation for that event.
Yeah. I got a quote from you. Outside of raising a family, the Rugby World Cup goes down as the number one event in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is. I was so inspired by what happened, and proud of being part of a team that could galvanise New Zealand, not just rugby people, but New Zealanders, to get them behind it and really support it in the right way. And when I say that, I mean this. One of our biggest risks of the event was that the All Blacks at that stage had not won the Rugby World Cup since 1987. And people were getting pretty grumpy as we went through, World Cups subsequently. And you talked to Laurie Mains a short while ago.
I've had John Hart on as well, and the impact it had on his mental health in '99.
So the rugby community was pretty bloody pissed with this, that they hadn't won. But of course, we were hosting the world, and we didn't want this to be all about the All Blacks finally winning. We wanted it to be a celebration of New Zealand hosting the world. And that's a completely different mentality. And it was one of the reasons I think the government supported the setting up of a separate organisation and didn't necessarily look for leaders that came out of rugby to run it. So, that the way in which we laid a platform to get people connected into it and then let them loose to do the great stuff they could do. So we ran, the event, I think, from memory, was 48 games of rugby. So, okay, there was a formula that we were bound into to run 48 games of rugby. 20 teams, 48 games. But there was this whole opportunity of a nation coming in as hosts that we just needed to find the right keys to galvanise people to jump on board and for people to communities to show themselves off. And we got it right, and I could watch it growing, and I knew this was going to be great. And then to see it just take off at the end was fantastic.
Yeah, the line that was used was a stadium of 4 million. That sort of became like a mission statement. Can you remember the origins of that line?
Yeah, the clever people that were piecing together a bid to host the tournament, working New Zealand Rugby, came up with this, and they were right. What they were saying, and this sort of goes back to about 2005, is that New Zealand, you go back to that time, is the spiritual home of rugby, the All Blacks, And so what they were saying is, you bring this Rugby World Cup to New Zealand and we will give everyone the greatest rugby experience. That was perfect for the bid because the people who were voting on where it would go, it resonated with them. Many of them had played against the All Blacks and they respected, that and that history. And so it was a really clever bid catchphrase. But when we started working on it and started thinking about what's the story of the tournament, we thought, no, it can't just be about rugby. And so we gradually evolved this stadium of 4 million from a pure rugby story. We always kept rugby at the heart of it because it had to be. But we started spreading it so that it had reasons why all sorts of communities around New Zealand and peoples could connect with it in their own way without having to commit to rugby as opposed to committing to New Zealand hosting. And, people saw the opportunity and it just sort of mushroomed. Even like Dunedin suddenly decided Carisbrook was a dog and they'd build a new stadium. And from a risk management point of view, you're looking at this and thinking, God, are they going to finish this on time? And it was going to have a roof over the top. Can they even, because at this stage, we didn't know these sorts of things, could they even grow grass on the ground? Well, this was a consortium of construction people that were engaged to build this. They themselves made a conscious decision that although they knew during the construction period they would hit lots and lots of problems with each other, they would shelve those problems. They wouldn't necessarily resolve them if they couldn't, but they would put them aside and they would concentrate on getting the stadium built in time as a contribution to the success of Rugby World Cup in New Zealand. And that's what they did. And you won't remember this, but they were building a new motorway sort of out to the airport in Auckland. And likewise, Fletcher's were leading a consortium that were doing this. And they made exactly the same decision. They said, our contribution to this is to finish this motorway, get it ready so that when people arrive in New Zealand for the Rugby World Cup, this is ready and working and they can enjoy their first impressions of New Zealand coming in from the airport are good ones. And I went along, during that construction time, I would go along and speak to their workers and tell them the story of Rugby World Cup. And everyone was into it big time. And this was happening in every direction.
So what year is this?
This is sort of, it started 2007, this work, but it really probably intensified around 2009, 9-10. And, so we had all these, we were running the rugby tournament, but we had all these projects happening around New Zealand that we were connected into that were all doing it for the same reason. And it was just inspiring, and you just knew, everyone was going to make this work, and they did.
And then there's unforeseen things like the Christchurch earthquakes. Did you lose, literally lose sleep over those sort of things? That must have been one of the toughest decisions you've ever had to make in your life.
Well, actually, the decision was easy, but the emotional impact was enormous. So, the Christchurch, it happened in February 2011. And we were sitting in a Rugby World Cup board meeting in Auckland at Eden Park, and we had, I don't know why, but we had the TVs on without the sound, and we suddenly started seeing what was happening in Christchurch, breaking news. And we realised, what a major this was going to be. And so the next 2 weeks we had, because the government was into this big time, every service that you needed, police, whatever, they were into it. And so it wasn't hard to extract the information we needed. And what became really clear and topped off, I think, with an inspection one day of Lancaster Park and seeing what a mess it was, is that the decision was obvious. We couldn't go there. But then communicating that to the Christchurch people who were in the worst moments of their lives. And so what we did is we staged the communication over a period of 2 to 3 weeks to take them on a journey so that when we made our decision, it had a much better chance of being accepted than it would do if we'd come straight out and said no show, even though we knew really early on there was no show. And then we had to concentrate really hard on how to, we're talking about a stadium of 4 million. How do you keep Christchurch engaged? So a lot of work went into finding ways of doing that. And we did okay in the end.
How did you do it?
Well, Well, we had to, we'd had 7 games were set down to be played at Lancaster Park, and we'd sold $28 million worth of tickets at the time the earthquake happened. All those games had to be reallocated around New Zealand, and you couldn't just send 7 games to some other place. So it was a hell of an exercise. We kept as many of them in the South Island as possible, so that access of Christchurch people who wanted to go would be closer. Some we had to send to Auckland. Well, the airlines and the hotels said, we will. Anyone who had an air ticket to go to Christchurch could change it free of charge to go to Auckland. The hotels would charge them only the same rates that whatever people had booked in Auckland. Some people in Auckland started up a free billeting, so anyone from Christchurch would come up and stay with them for free. It was some amazing stuff went on. In the opening ceremony, which was an amazing ceremony, we had Jonah Lomu was a centrepiece, but you might remember there was a little kid that he brought onto the field, and he was wearing a Canterbury jersey, and he became a bit of a star of the opening ceremony. 3 of the touring teams, well, the All Blacks plus Australia and England, all agreed to go down to Christchurch and spend time. Well, they didn't agree. They said, this is what we're going to do. Martin Johnson leading England. Robbie Deans was in charge of Australia, and Robbie's from Christchurch, obviously. They took their teams down to Christchurch during the tournament. They stayed there so people could connect with them, But I mean, God, it was awful.
Knowing what you know now, were you qualified for the job or did you grow into it?
Bit of both.
I don't know if you can ever be fully qualified for a...
Listen, I'd had a good background in events and World Cricket Cup, World Cups. I'd had the pressures of cricket, which in the end were nowhere near close to what Rugby World Cup was, but it still had meant that I had been under real pressure, and people had seen me under pressure, so there was that sort of thing. But then, you have to learn it on the job. But we did have 4 years, and it was lovely because it was quite gentle to start with, and then it just gradually grew and grew and grew. So you could grow with it, And I had an extraordinarily talented team working with me because we could pick the best of the best. Everyone wanted to work on this, and so the sort of people that were working on Rugby World Cup were just brilliant. And so that workforce, by the time it was, getting close to the event, that would have been the most talented workforce in New Zealand.
Would your reflection on the event be different if the All Blacks hadn't won, or was the rugby sort of irrelevant?
To me, it was irrelevant, and it was always about how would New Zealand be seen as the host of a world event. And we already knew before the final we'd nailed it. And in fact, I'll tell you the story. And do you know who Stephen Jones is? So Stephen Jones is a rugby writer from England.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And he has made a living out of needling New Zealand rugby and the All Blacks for years and years and years. And he'd condemn the haka and say it should not be allowed and make awful comments about it. And New Zealand rugby, he was persona non grata with New Zealand rugby. And he was the head of the rugby tribe of journalists in England who hated the idea the Rugby World Cup was coming to New Zealand, by the way. They thought, that's a real step backwards that it comes to this little country in the middle of nowhere. So 2 years before the event, I emailed Stephen and said, can we catch up? I'm coming to England. Why don't we catch up? And so we agreed to meet. He lived south of London, somewhere, and we found a halfway in between where I was and he was in a restaurant, an Italian restaurant, and we caught up at about noon, and we rolled out at about 5 p.m. after a couple of bottles of red. And he said, I told him the story of the stadium of 4 million, our vision. And he said, if you can deliver on that, then I will tell the world that is a great thing. So he and I then stayed in close contact New Zealand Rugby didn't like this idea, but it wasn't their business. And I just made sure every year I'd go to England and to France, and I'd get the journalists together, and I'd take them to a pub and give them free drinks and free pizza, because the journos, that really worked hard, you know. And I'd do a gentle sell, not a hard sell, gentle sell all the time. And so I got to know them quite well.
Made them feel valued, I guess.
And then they loved the idea that we were spreading this around New Zealand, even if they hated it going to New Zealand. They loved what was happening in terms of preparation, communities preparing to host teams. And then Stephen, I emailed him about 3 months before the tournament, and I said, listen, I've got a holiday home at Taupo. Why don't you stay there for a while you're out here? And
you went deep.
And he said, yeah, sure, love to. And he said, do you mind if I take a few of my journo mates with me? And I said, no, absolutely, go for it. He fell in love with Annie as well, because Annie turned up at that long lunch, and so he would often refer to her, long-suffering wife. And so there was a real connection there. And so he did. He came and stayed at Taupo. And
Jeez, I can't believe you gave him the keys to your house.
well, I was
It shows
sacrificing.
how serious you took the job.
Sacrificing it for New Zealand, but because we delivered, he reflected that in the way he wrote, and so did all of the British journos. And so we turned what could have been a big risk into actually what was a real endorsement from those people.
Oh, that's a great story. Is that in your book?
Yeah, it is.
It is? That's
and
a
then
great story.
I stayed in touch with him, and if I emailed him now, he'd be really receptive. It's just I don't get these free trips to England anymore with jobs. So,
Was there a moment during the tournament where you and your team could sort of exhale and think, yeah, we've done it?
well,
So once the tournament started, or?
listen, the first night of the tournament, which was the opening ceremony was unbelievable. It was brilliant. But actually also what happened that night was the train broke down between downtown Auckland and Eden Park. Now, that wasn't our responsibility, but it had a huge impact on how people... It was bloody stupid because it was the biggest risk we could see transport-wise in the whole tournament. But the train line there only had one track, so if a train broke down, it broke down. There was nothing you could do about it. So we were telling people not to come downtown and then try to get to Eden Park. Well, people ignored it, and there were, I don't know how many people, but 100,000 plus down on the waterfront on the opening afternoon night.
It was massive. Yeah, there were screens at the Cloud, and there were public events. Yeah,
and then of course people tried to get to Eden. Well, of course they had trouble, and so a lot of people were late to the start of the game, which was a bit of criticism. And I'm thinking, well, you took on a bit too much there, trying to do both. But so that caused a bit of angst. And then the games kept rolling out, and you could see the support that people were giving it right around the country, and you could see all the teams relaxing into it and enjoying it. But we still had we had a financial issue hanging over our heads. The tournament was budgeted to make a $30 million loss. I think the budget was, I think, $300 million, say, against a cost of $270 million. And both the government and New Zealand Rugby, who were responsible for the loss, were putting enormous pressure on us. And we had to hit a ticket revenue. Say the ticket revenue was $270 million. And the previous largest ticket revenue event in New Zealand's history was the sold-out Lions Tour in 2005, which... off the back of every game sold out, it generated $24 million. So we had to do 11 times that to hit ticket budget. So we were up against it the whole way, but we were tracking. But then we would get to the start of a day or two before the tournament, we were about 20 million short, 25 million short. And I was catching it in the neck I remember, I'll never forget one journalist had me on live radio and she just ripped the shit out of me about, well, you're never going to reach this target. And it didn't matter what I said to her. She just had it in for me and the tournament. Well, what we knew is that two things that people didn't think about. One is, once the tournament's up and running, you're still selling tickets right through to the time it finishes. So you didn't reach the end of ticket sales before the tournament. It was kept going. And the second thing was the magnificence of the opening ceremony galvanised people to say, I want to be there. And so ticket sales after the opening ceremony just took off. But even so, 20 million was a big target. Well, we hit that 20 million target 2 days before the final. And, me and the 3 senior managers were sitting in Auckland at a hotel room when the news came through. And we just looked at each other and thought, wow, that was something we probably between ourselves, unspoken, thought, we might struggle on this one. And then we hit it, and we didn't even have to we bought a bottle of champagne and we just quietly celebrated hitting that. But we still had, you couldn't relax, because you couldn't relax until all the teams had left New Zealand and gone home. And so, you're on edge. But I have to say, when we were at the final and the All Blacks had scraped in, which even though it wasn't our number one objective, still we knew would help enormously in terms of the thing. And because it was a close final, was probably a good thing, because it felt like everyone then was connected even more, because the people inside the park had been dragged through 90 minutes of psychological hell to get there.
Actually, months of psychological hell.
Well,
there
yes.
was Dan Carter getting injured.
Yeah.
Stephen Donald out
Stephen
whitebaiting.
Donald's story was brilliant.
Richie McCaw training on a broken foot.
Yeah. No, they were brilliant, all these stories. But we weren't connecting with the All Blacks. For us, they were just one of the 20 teams. Sounds odd, but that's the way we decided to do it. Because if we favoured them in any way, other teams would pick up on this and their journos, and we would get absolutely nailed rightly. And so they, for us, were just another team. But of course, in your heart, you want the All Blacks to win the tournament. So it really wasn't until we were sitting there at Eden Park in the final that I actually, for the first time, switched on to them and hoped. But the funny thing is, I'm sitting in the stands at Eden Park. Because I'm running the tournament, I get quite good tickets. And I'm sitting next to the guy who had run the World Cup in France 4 years before. And he had become a good friend. He's another one who stayed at Taupo, him and his family. And even though we had been really good friends, suddenly I'm realising, he's realising, we're sitting next to each other, and France are playing New Zealand, and this is the ultimate test. So the two of us, for the whole event, were as quiet as can be, respecting each other. So it was memorable. But when we were having a few drinks after the game had finished, even Murray McCulley, Minister of Sport, came up to me and shook my hand. Now, Murray and I had our moments with each other, or he was the minister, so he'd had his moments with me. And so it was quite a nice thing to, in the end, know that he was happy. And of course, Jock Hobbs.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, well, the cancer had started to emerge during the lead up to the event, and so he'd had to step down from chairing the board because he was my boss. But he was kept fully involved in the whole thing. So to sit with him after the final and know that we'd achieved what it had been his dream right at the start, to bring the World Cup to New Zealand. And so for him to be able to see that through, he died a few months after the event, incredibly sad story, but he had at least seen it succeed beyond even his expectations.
Yeah, I'll never forget that moment of him presenting McCaw with his cap for 100 tests.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
You mentioned Murray McCulley before. There must have been a bunch of people like him whose, when your phone started buzzing and you saw a name on the screen, your heart sunk a little bit. Who was on that list? There must have been journalists.
Murray was top by a considerable distance. And we didn't gel easily, mainly because I didn't understand politics enough, and I didn't really realise the power imbalance between us. I sort of regarded us more of colleagues and whatnot, and I made a few false steps, and he came down on me, a ton of bricks. But then, that happened about 2 years before the tournament, or 18 months before, and I had to fight my way back from that to gain his confidence. After that, it was pretty tough.
Oh.
But also, what I saw was how Murray had the power within government to make things happen. And he, over the period that he was in charge Minister of Rugby World Cup, and particularly in the last 3 months before the event, he made a whole lot of things happen in government to support us. And so he did a fantastic job enabling us and enabling New Zealand to succeed. And by the end of it, we'd sort of, I think, made peace with each other, and even more afterwards.
I suppose you both had like an unimaginable amount of pressure on you for getting it right.
Well, he had John Key on his back saying, mate, we've staked our reputation, because when National got voted in halfway through our preparation, Key had come out and said, I've got two major objectives. One is the economy and the other is Rugby World Cup. And we're thinking, that's us. And so there was, and then Key said to McCulley, well, you're our guy, you make sure this happens. And so you're probably right, is that Murray was under pretty strong pressure from Key to make sure he got it right. And he transferred some of that stress onto me at times. But he was a brilliant enabler in the end. So, I realised afterwards I was a bit naive and I'd made some mistakes at the time he started really getting into me. And if I'd been smarter, I would have avoided those and there wouldn't have been those sort of issues. But I didn't. I just wasn't politically savvy enough at the time. And so I copped it from him, and it was uncomfortable. It was really uncomfortable.
What like? Can you offer any examples?
Oh, I was just sort of sidelined a bit. Even though I was the CEO of the thing, they'd go around me a fair bit and stuff to get some things done.
Right, just because they lost confidence in you?
Yeah,
or
a little
something?
bit. And so I had to steel myself and say, righto, do I get out of this now? Or do I hang on in there and fight my way back into it? And the only way I could fight my way back into it was doing it their way rather than doing it my way.
Okay.
And that was quite a learning for me. But, I shut my mouth and I buckled down, and that's what I did. I didn't like it much, but I knew that if I wanted to stay in it, that's the way I had to do it. So I did it. And, gradually, got it back on an even keel, which was good. Which meant that, by the time I got it on an even keel, it was probably 2 or 3 months before the tournament. So I was able to actually enjoy the tournament.
Yeah.
In fact, the role of CEO, quite of what you, in an event like that, you are the main storyteller. And that was something that I was good at. I could tell a story that it would resonate with them and they'd buy into it. Well, by the time the tournament starts, the need for me to tell those stories had disappeared. It was already happening. And so the running of the tournament rested with my operational team headed by Therese Walsh, who was just unbelievable. And so I could sort of relax during the tournament while she made sure things happened, which she did. So I actually enjoyed the tournament. I actually enjoyed rocking around and turning up and watching all these games of rugby. And
I suppose the job's done by that point, isn't
my
it?
job was.
Yeah.
Hers wasn't. She had to, and I was responsible if it went wrong. But she's so capable that it worked. And then you needed a bit of luck. Like there's a few things. If I stand up and tell a story, I'll talk about the Tongan team arriving at Auckland Airport and the Tongan community in Auckland going out there and the red flags and bringing traffic to a standstill and their enthusiasm and the way people sort of really bought into that. Early on, there was a game at Eden Park between Australia and Ireland, and in the stadium it felt like you were in Dublin. There were 55,000 people dressed up in green supporting the Irish. And the Irish won a completely unexpected victory, which turned the expectations of the tournament on its head, because we thought we would head towards Australia-New Zealand final, but that result meant that we were going to be playing Australia in the semi as long as we got that far. And so that was a bit nerve-wracking because we got to the semi playing Australia, Robbie Deans as captain, as coach, Quade Cooper as public enemy number one. If they had beaten us, then, you know, that could have soured a whole lot of people quite significantly. But it didn't happen. But, you know, there were just moments in the tournament. Steve Chew and I were driving to New Plymouth for a game, and we went through King Country in a little town called Bennydale. And, you know, Bennydale's got a population of about 10 and one main street. And the lampposts in the street, each of them had hand-painted murals on them depicting each of the 20 teams in the tournament. And the one shop was just covered in the bunting of Rugby World Cup. And we looked at each other and thought, you know, this is how far this tournament's got into New Zealand. It was brilliant. So there was sort of all those brilliant memories.
And you got recognised for it in the 2012 New Year's Honours List.
Yeah.
What did you get?
Companion of, not quite sure what it means, but companion of
services to sports admin. Yeah, what did that mean to you?
Oh, that was really nice. I think I saw the reaction of my family to it. You know, my brothers and sister and Annie, and they were really thrilled. My greatest satisfaction wasn't that. It was actually being part of selection, you know, successfully delivering the tournament. That was just a nice sort of way to top it off in the end. But then I saw the reaction of them and I thought, oh, well, you know, they care. So, you know, that was nice.
Man, what a career. What a life.
It's gone in a few different directions.
Yeah, so you're about to turn 67?
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel at this stage of your life?
Well,
are you in a reflective stage or are you still smashing goals?
Well, I thought I was moving into a reflective stage a few times in the last 10 years. You know, I would finish Rugby World Cup and then I'm sort of saying to Annie, oh, maybe I'll just cut back a bit and whatever. Then I walked into tourism and that wasn't cutting back, it was full on. And then by that stage we were living in Wellington for the Rugby World Cup and tourism, and we wanted to get back to Auckland. And Dave Higgins had been talking to me about getting involved with Duco, and so in the end I said, yeah, okay, let's do that. So that, you know, there was nothing quiet about that job. It was just full on the whole time, and it took me into really uncomfortable territory because, you know, I was a kid who had a pretty protected upbringing and whatnot, and I was stepping into the middle of something that, you know, they were filled with, they had a staff of kids that had had hard lives. They were talented, but they, you know, each had their stories that were depicted pretty hard times. And they didn't know me. You know, the interesting thing, I could walk in there and out of a staff of 7 or 8, they didn't have a clue who I was. So I had no head start on how they would think about me. I had to earn everything to get their respect and cooperation. So that was a really interesting exercise of trying to, and it was all an open plan office. So there's no me sitting in an office by myself. It was, we're all pitched in together, including Dean and David. So it was a vibrant, volatile environment.
Yeah, I know quite a bit of the team. They're an eclectic bunch of people. Yeah, Dean, David, Carlina, Stanaway.
Yeah.
Odd bunch of people.
Well, but this was
wonderful people, but
this was, you know, I guess David himself. You know, people don't recognise his genius. I do. He's got a few shortcomings, but he has got a genius that I haven't seen in anyone else. And he would choose people that there's no formula to it. It's just whether he looked at them and thought, you can do a job for us. And so you're right, it was an interesting bunch. And I learnt an enormous amount because there I am, you know, I suppose I was 60 at that stage, never been exposed to this sort of environment in my life. hanging on in there, trying to look confident, but, hanging on in there. And then there was one side of the business that was about celebrity events, and there was some neat stuff that we did, like Nigella Lawson coming or one night with Richie McCaw and Dan Carter, Vector Arena, and so those sorts of things, which I was comfortable with. I knew that sort of side of it. But then there was the boxing side. Well, when I'd been talking to David and Dean about doing the job, I'd never really for a second given any thought to the boxing side. And probably because at that stage they didn't have, Joseph Parker wasn't a big player. Well, walk in there and realise, okay, I'm going to have to be pretty closely involved in running a series of boxing events, and started to see what they were doing with Joseph. And, at that stage when we started, he was a complete unknown. Kid they'd picked out of South Auckland, who had some talent but not universally recognised, and Bob Jones was one who into boxing but didn't rate Parker and was quite critical of Duco supporting him. And they contracted 2 fighters, Parker and a young Aussie kid called Jeff Horn, lived in Brisbane, little welterweight. And so they started running events to show these kids off and to work them through the world rankings, which are a maze. There's 4 different rankings, and David and Dean would just be constantly plotting, how can we get these kids through this to the point where they could be challenging for a world title. It was fascinating to watch, and of course I'm trying to get myself up to speed with boxing. At the same time, Annie's looking at me and thinking, I don't know why you're doing this, and I don't like it. She hated the boxing side, and most of the family felt the same way. So I'm trying to contend with that, and yet we started to make progress with these 2 kids, and David and Dean were just unbelievably good about how they threaded them through the rankings and how they wooed the various world body people to needle them into giving Joseph a go or Jeff a go, and then us creating these boxing events that were designed to show them off. And this is where David and Dean were spending all of their own money. It wasn't particularly profitable at that stage. But then the kids both started to succeed, and we started to get them going. And then it became apparent, both of these kids could get to the point where they could fight for world titles. So one stage I'm doing a box refereeing course to try and make myself understand a bit more, because I was looking at the ring and thinking, these are so close, I can't tell the difference as to who's winning, who's losing. And anyway, I did that. That became slightly clearer. But it was just the theatre of taking them through. And then, of course, Joseph got his chance. But to get his chance and to make sure it happened in Auckland, David and Dean put everything on the line for that to happen. And, and Joseph just snuck in he fought a guy called Carlos Takam. It was an eliminator fight to see who would fight for a world title. And seriously, I thought he'd lost. I think most people thought I'd just missed out. And the judges saw it our way, so he won that, so he got a title fight. But they then had to put up an enormous amount of money. But the difference in that 2-year period, 18 months, 19 months, the first fight I was involved in, Joseph fought at Manukau Velodrome, and we had grossed $28,000 off hospitality. In the last 2 fights that I was involved in, the Carlos Takam and then Andrew Ruiz, who he fought for the title, we sold more than $2 million worth of corporate hospitality to people. And we did it. Most of that was done in a space of 48 hours, where we would warm people up. We're going on market. Then we'd go, and the whole thing would go crazy for 48 hours, and we'd sell all this hospitality. And then, I'd said to David and Dean, right, sorry, but I'm finishing. I'm worn out. And they desperately tried to hang on to me for a while. But I said, listen, I'm sorry, I just can't do it anymore. But Parker had his fight, and he won, and he became the world champion, WBO heavyweight, I think. A month or so later, they sell out Suncorp Stadium in Brisbane, and Jeff Horn beats Manny Pacquiao to become world champion. 2 young kids. They only chose 2. They only contracted 2. This is why I think they've got brilliance there. Both of them became world champions. And even when Parker was fighting for the world, Annie wouldn't come. Only one brother would come along, that was it. So I had to get out.
Yeah. Creating tension at home. Yeah, and David's had significant success since then with the symphony format as well. He's a genius.
He is.
Yeah. Is there anything you're still working on as a man at this stage in your life?
Well, I hadn't finished telling you. I was there was a risk I was drifting towards retirement. And I was still heavily involved in New Zealand cricket and as a board director, and then I became the chair. But actually I then got the opportunity to start pulling together the board chairs of the various sports in New Zealand at a national level. And, this is, for the past 15 years, 20 years, this is what I've sort of almost specialised in doing, is grabbing groups of people and getting them together into cohesive communities. And so I got the chance to do this. That started 5 years ago. And that's been incredibly stimulating. So, most of the people listening to this will be yawning now about, this sort of thing. But for me, it's incredibly motivating. And what it's done also is it's given me a focus for this part of my career that I didn't expect.
Yeah.
And so I'm totally motivated around this stuff now to make it work and to get people, as competent as they can be when they're chairing the boards of these national sporting organisations, because they're full of risk, those jobs. So, that keeps me going. So I've probably changed now from I don't think I'd have the resilience to do a CEO role again, but I've got the resilience to form these communities and get them working with each other. And
resilience or like just energy, time, motivation?
I just, I think each time you do a CEO role, you get beaten up quite a lot. And I was sick of being beaten up. Even though I'd had lots of good times out of those roles, I just couldn't be bothered doing that again. And so I didn't want to expose myself to that. So these other ones have less of that happening, but are still really intellectually stimulating to try and get a bunch of people into a better shape than what they are when you start. And that's been good fun. And that sort of led, I mentioned to you a little bit earlier about I'm taking the government on at the moment about some gambling legislation where they, in the first part of forming that legislation, they've completely stuffed up. But I suddenly had a whole community that I'd been working with that I could galvanise into this. And the government got completely surprised by how strong we were, how quickly we were strong to say to them, you're doing the wrong thing. So, those sort of things are good fun.
You're never going to stop, eh?
I don't want to stop, but what's happened now, and this has been the case for the last 4 or 5 years, is I'm totally in control of my own diary.
Yeah.
The sorts of things I do, largely I determine when I do them, which means that I feel in control of my life. Last week I put some bookings in place for Annie and I to go to Europe next year for 6 weeks. And we're going to walk the Camino walk in Spain. Now, we're not going to walk 800 kilometres, which is the full length of one of them, but we'll walk probably 300 to 400 kilometres. And all we'll be doing is just walking through countryside in Spain and talking to each other and the other people that are on the trip and just basically, living in that world. And I can do that sort of thing now. So I'm setting up my whole diary for next year now, carving out those sorts of windows. And it's quite a freeing thing to be able to do that, and yet at the same time still be active in a lot of different business things.
Yeah, are you happy? Are you enjoying this phase of life?
Oh, yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned to you also earlier, the reality of your mortality starts to hit home more the older you get. And so therefore the motivation to not waste your time is great, but doing stuff that I enjoy. Now, a lot of the stuff I do is hard slog, but I enjoy it. And then there's, the family stuff and whatnot, and Annie's just retired from teaching, although she's doing a lot of relieving stuff. But, we can go to our family home in Taupo now that Stephen Jones has moved out. And, we can do that whenever we want, sort of stuff. And getting involved in cycling's been really interesting because they have been through really tough times.
Yes. And
I knew that. And I thought it'd be really neat to help them with the recovery process. And it's been as interesting as... Now, I know nothing and I'm not learning anything about what happens on the track with cycling. I'm just concentrating on the organisation and how it can run as well as it needs to. So, those sort of things that I would never have known 2 years ago that's what I'd been involved in, but opportunities arise and you look at them and quickly say, oh, well, yes, all right, or no, I won't get involved in that.
Well, you've got so much experience, haven't you? And your kids, your 4 kids, all in their 30s now. Have you got grandkids? Are you a grandparent?
4 grandkids.
Yeah.
And that's another phase of your life, you get into. And my kids are turning out as Annie and I would hope. So we love and really admire each of them. They've hooked up with good people, so we like them a lot. And now the grandkiddies have come along, and so there's 4 now, and by my count there should be 8 by the time they're finished, if they're listening.
No pressure.
No pressure.
No urgency.
And so we're sort of adapting to that life of having to be part of those kids' lives, and it's brilliant.
Yeah.
And so there's always things happening, and so we are being kept going forward. So I don't want to think about stopping. I can evolve what I do, but I can't see a time of stopping.
Your grandkids, how do you hope they see you as a man?
You quickly realise that it doesn't matter what you have done or what you think you've done, they're not interested. They are only interested in how you connect with them. And so the concentration goes on to connecting with them in a way that is fun for both them and us. And so, we've got to the stage now where 2 of them, we can take them away down to Taupo for a few days and cross our fingers and
must be nice to give them back at the end.
Oh God, yes. And but they, every Saturday morning in the winter we're off to soccer to watch the 6-year-old play, and it's just fun watching them grow.
Yeah.
And having a tiny bit of influence, not much because it's their parents that are leading them, but we can chime in there and just be people that they like being with, and that's what we want to make sure it is.
What's a perfect day off for you?
I'm useless having days off. If I'm sitting at home, Saturdays and Sundays to me, I potter around doing different parts of work, but I don't begrudge any of it, and it's not intrusive. And this, it might happen for 2 or 3 hours a day, and it won't stop anything that Annie and I decide we're going to do. So I don't switch off much. I read a lot. I read 2 or 3 crime novels a week, and that's really important. But and we walk a lot together. We walk around the streets around here and in Taupo, and stuff, and that's really relaxing. And just staying connected to each other, because I think when I was a CEO I learnt this in cricket, is that I sort of got consumed by it. And when you're consumed by it, you sometimes, I didn't see clearly enough around me in my family life, and Annie let me know, and I sort of learnt that lesson. So even under the pressure of Rugby World Cup, it wasn't a problem to keep a good balance, but we've just ensured that we stay connected with each other at all times, and that's really important.
Yeah, I know you missed one of your kids' births, Stephanie. You were batting for New Zealand at the time.
It was brilliant. So
I just point that out as like just one of the, I'm sure, many sacrifices you've made.
Oh yeah, but it turned into a great thing for us to remember, because we decided we'd have a second kid, and we, with pregnancies, we were lucky. It happened sort of quickly most times. Didn't even know about the last couple. It just happened. But with Steph, we looked at the cricket schedule and thought, right, there's a good gap there in November. Let's go for it. And Annie got pregnant, and then New Zealand cricket suddenly decided we would go and play Australia in Perth in November. And so I rang them up and said, well, this is a bit of a problem. They said, don't worry, when's the baby due? And the baby was due about a week before the start of the test. So they said, don't worry, stay in New Zealand till the baby's born and then come and join us. But of course, Steph was late. And in those days, you didn't go in for induced births or C-sections or whatever. You sort of just waited. And so she just wasn't arriving. And then Annie said to me, and Annie had her mum with her, who she probably had more confidence in around a birth than me, and she said, oh, just go. So we went across, and then Steph didn't come until about the second day of the test match, and they were obviously, we had a New Zealand crew over there for the test match, and Graham Veach, Tony Veach's dad, was leading it, and he came to me and said, hey, Paul Holmes wants to interview you and Annie on the 7:00 p.m. show, the home show, which was huge. So we'll do it by satellite. Can you come down to the ground, and Annie will be at home with new baby? And so they sent around all the camera people to our house in Devonport for her, and I was down at the ground. It was only about 8:00 in the morning, so it didn't interfere with the cricket. And Paul did this live cross, and that was sensational in the sense that he gave us, we had a quarter of an hour talking to him, and then he said, just carry on talking to each other and we'll bugger off, and we did that, which was neat. And so, it became pretty high profile about Steph's birth. So it actually was fun, the way all that. By the time I'd come back home, some dear old lady in Devonport had knitted a New Zealand cricket jersey for Steph. And, it was all that. In those days, Dom, it's hard to imagine now with the media coverage that exists everywhere. But in those days, we only had TV1 and TV2, and News Talk ZB had just started, and then the music channels. And so if cricket was on TV1, everyone was watching it because there were only two channels to watch. So you were really well known, particularly as it turned out by older generations who, would sit around home watching cricket on TV. Yeah. It suited them. And so you were actually, I was recognised by a lot of people just because that I was sitting on TV in their family rooms. And it was sort of, strange.
Yeah, and the Holmes show that you mentioned before, that was a massive deal. Everyone watched either the Holmes show or Shortland Street. Yeah. And this is before smartphones, before FaceTime. Oh. So to have like a connection like that where you could see your baby was a big deal.
Oh, well, I'd go away on a tour and you get I'd have to write letters home once a week, and they'd take a week to get there. And I could ring home, but you were taking potluck because you had no smartphones or anything. You couldn't organise a time, so I just would guess at a time. And if we got lucky, Annie and I could talk to each other. But you could only afford to talk for 5, 6, 7 minutes because the cost was horrendous. And I'm away for 3 months, and this is happening. So you do forget. But that was what life was like. So,
We didn't know any different.
Didn't know any different.
Yeah. What are your best and worst habits?
Well, from a work point of view, one of my best habits is I'm really diligent. One of my worst habits is that I drive people crazy with detail and, just constantly at them. So the two things go hand in hand, really.
It's quite funny. I had Sir Steve Henson on the podcast, and his theory is that with most people, their greatest strength is also their greatest weakness.
Yeah. Well, I think that's right. As I sometimes forget that in my enthusiasm, and also given that I control my own work life, is that other people are on the receiving end of. And I sort of, I'm still useless. I sit there and communicate mainly by email, and I do a lot of it on weekends because I spend the whole week talking to people and don't have time to tidy everything up. And so at the weekends I sit there, and then people would be on the receiving end of emails from me on the weekend, and they wouldn't know whether to reply or not. And if I said, please don't bother, I'm just getting it off my thing, it wouldn't matter. They feel like, this guy, I better respond to him quickly. So, anyway, that's...
You need to use more emojis.
I can do that on my smartphone. I don't know how to do it on a computer.
Yeah.
But probably my worst habit at home is a failure to actually, apart from walking, which I'm good, I really at this age need to be doing some proper stretching and strength stuff. I used to do it when I was playing, but I'm hopeless, and I know I need to do it because it's going to count if I don't.
Yeah.
And I keep telling myself this, and I've been telling myself for 4 or 5 years, but I just haven't got over that bar. I have to for the Camino. I can't walk for 2 or 3 weeks without actually preparing for it. So hopefully that's a catalyst.
What are you most afraid of?
At this stage of life, would be living life without Annie. If something were to happen to her, and I think she probably feels the same, I was actually just working through the rest of the life without her. We're so close that it would be really tough. So both of us, don't really want to think about this, but that it weighs on us a little bit. And that's why we've got to stay healthy and also enjoy ourselves while we really can.
It's the price for great love, though, isn't it?
Well, she's been great. I mean, we've been together since 1979. We blind date, and married for nearly 43 years. So, she's put up with a lot. So have I. And just in case she's listening finally to one of these.
If you regret that comment, I'll remove it.
And so we've, we worked out a way of working with each other, and it works.
What is the key? What is the key to that sort of longevity?
I tell you and seriously, one of the most important things that we learned was the value of her having a real purpose in life, which was completely separate to anything I was doing. I mean, the problem is when you're doing the sort of high-profile stuff I was doing for a while, it tends to consume life around you. And she had been a lawyer, had then had our 4 kids, and had raised them, got them well advanced. And the risk at that time was that she'd feel like she'd always be an add-on to me in cricket or whatever. And so she retrained as a teacher, and she then started teaching full-time. And it was fantastic for her. It gave her sense of real purpose. It was great for both of us because I knew she was happy doing that, and so I wasn't worried about her being worried about what I was doing and the time it would take. And so it really worked. And so we've kept that going. She taught for 17 years and still teaches a wee bit relieving. And that's a great thing because it means she's got her own life, lots of her own friends, and I know that makes her happy. And that takes a bit of pressure off me, which means I can do some of the things that I'm doing, but a whole lot of what we do is together. So, you've got that lucky balance, really.
Yeah. Annie and the kids, how would you like them to describe you when you're not in the room? Maybe 3 words. How would you like them to describe you?
Like them. I think, I don't know, what do you say? Really funny. Like, my ability to tell jokes is amazing, but it's only really me that appreciates it. So they roll their eyes and
well, like puns, dad jokes?
So, well, they could be anything, but it's just, I think they should better appreciate my sense of humour. It's something that would be great. I think, I think as long as all of them, including Annie, feel supported, that's important, that I am there and have been there when they've needed me, and they've needed that sort of connection. That change. When you're parents, you take it in turns. Sometimes it's Annie that has to be the lead supporter, and I just need to be there supporting her to support them. And then, depending on what it is, sometimes that switches around, and so that if they feel support and love, then that's all of them, then that's great. But I feel it from them, so I'm lucky. So as long as they feel like it's a two-way thing.
So we've been going for 2 hours, 10 minutes. When you revisit aspects of your life like this, like in a greatest hits sort of format, I guess, the playing career, the early years, the boardroom, the family stuff. Yeah, are you proud of yourself?
Yeah, I am. But I've as I get older, I've learnt to keep things in perspective a lot more. So in other words, I can be delighted about stuff, but also understand that's just, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that the family stuff is much more important, getting that right, keeping it right, than the work stuff. But actually, it's the combination of the two that sort of makes me feel really good. But then, Dom, as we talked about a few minutes ago, I don't want to stop. I mean, either on the home front or the work front. I just want to find things to do that are contributing to what's around me, and which I find really satisfying to do. So that's really easy, when you're a grandparent, because your kids need help. It's a hard life. They look at us now and say, how the hell did you have 4 kids? They've got 2 kids, 2 of them. And they just can't imagine having 4 kids, particularly they were 6 and under at the time to start with. So you see them rushed off their feet, so you've got to chip in. And then when you do, you've got to make sure that the grandkids enjoy it, so that it's not just a shove them in front of TV and that's it type thing. You've actually got to help them enjoy the experience so they want to come back, and then it gets really good fun. But on the work front, I want to keep using my brain. I want to keep helping organisations do a bit better. That's why cycling's so interesting, is that they were a basket case for a while. They started to climb out before I got involved. Now I've got a chance to help them go much further than that and get back to proper stability. It'll take, there's a couple of years left in getting that far, I think, but I'm really clear about that's what my role is with them.
I'm excited to see what you do through your 70s.
My sister just turned 74 today. She's number 2 out of 5. Each of my siblings are still working, in their 70s. Now, I never would have guessed that 10 years ago, but it's an indication that life has changed, that, people still want to keep doing stuff to keep their lives interesting. And so, yeah, but I don't want to think that far ahead. I'm quite happy just to think about the next few months. And I'm also now a great believer that something will come up. A lot of things I'm doing now I never would have guessed 5 years ago. And I think, as long as I do the things I'm doing now well, then that means that opportunities will come out of nowhere. And if they look interesting, then, who the hell? Duco, boxing, never in 2011 would have thought that's where I would be for a while.
Yeah, that was random. No one had that on their bingo card for you.
I didn't. They didn't. But it happened. And it just now becomes part of my rich memory of,
the rich
life.
tapestry of life, as they say.
Right.
Yeah, is it nice reflecting like this?
Yeah, it is.
I
mean, it is. And you've done a lot of homework on this. And, yeah, it is. It is.
Well, I figure, from my perspective, if someone like you is going to give me a couple of hours of your time, it would be the least I can do is some thorough research.
Thanks, mate. No, it is good. I mean, it's... But I could probably do it to you. If I set myself, I could sit there and research for quite a long time. I'd have to talk to a few people, but you've done a hell of a lot. And I don't see you stopping. Our conversation at the start here about the podcast business you're now building up with JJ. That's exciting. That's something, you wouldn't have thought about 5 years ago. And I think that's the important thing about life, is you actually are ready to be able to see, assess, and if you think it's right, take opportunities that are in front of you. And they won't go away if you've still got that mindset. It's only if you just close yourself down and whatnot that things will start to disappear.
Oh, I see life like a rugby match. So 50 is sort of halfway. So we're in the second half now, just in the second half.
Yeah.
Same as you, there's a long way to go. When I was 30, my goal would have probably been to retire by 50.
Yeah.
That was sort of an aspirational thing. Now I couldn't think of anything worse. Like, you need purpose, don't you?
Well, when I was 30, I thought I'd be a lawyer the rest of my life with my brother. And I thought that was just preordained, and then got thrown up in the air. Chris Doig saying to me, why don't you come CEO of New Zealand Cricket?
Well, Martin Snedden, this has been a lot of fun.
Me too.
You are a great New Zealander, and thank you so much for coming on my podcast.
Thanks, Tom. Pleasure.